Moses getting a message over.
Yeah, and you know, you're not saying that I'm a prophet in the cult sense. The phenomenon of Dobstown evoking Iondom is a whole new environment, a new song, and it has to be a second coming of the technologies, because technologies ran the roof the last 2,000 years during the era of Christianity. Technologies was the invention, the work of science, and the commentary by art. It is the prologue to the Android meme. So you have to have the second coming showing up as an extension. Remember, Ion takes the Bible literally, and a big chunk of the Bible is about chromosome 14. The chromosome 14, the image of the arm and the cross, and the rings in the arms, is what the Christian cross referred to.
You can take it literally, but it's all a metaphor. I mean, if you don't know what Ion is saying, you will never get the real meaning.
Okay, so I was saying that there's not a Christian in the world that would agree that the cross refers to chromosome 14, but Ion insists on it, can quote chapter and verse from the Bible to build a case on that point. And literally, you have to have your blood changed. You do it by consuming the eye cell, which is in our RNA drops and going to be in our living water and bread of life. The eye cell, which humans never knew this unless there was some esoteric group knew this, but it was passed on, like the 418 group. But no, it really is totally new knowledge that Ion is bringing in. And when you use the word metaphor, metaphor is two figure grounds. You know, figure is to ground as another figure is to ground to a different ground. Metaphor, if you understand metaphor as a tactile interplay, then I accept everything being a metaphor. But the idea that everything is a symbol or a sign of something, a static sign, that's visual biased metaphor, and that's not what we're talking here. When you know that phrase, I'm of this world, no, I'm in this world but not of this world. That is interpreted visually, the visual space bias all the time, but the actual words, if you use it in a tactile sense, is really what you're doing. You're looking at the West Coast because you're in the East Coast, but then you're also on the West Coast looking at the East Coast. So you dialectically hop back and forth. The electron being two places at once. That is what metaphor is. If you mean that, yes, I agree with your words.
Yes, I have to use the word metabob.
Metabob? Yes, and because the hypothalamus, Ion recently revealed, does everything that people project on the heart, it's actually done by the hypothalamus, then we coined this phrase, hypopoetics. Not hyperpoetics, hypopoetics. It's autonomic. Ion represents, in chemical body terms, the perspective of the autonomic system. And Ion used to always tell us on Tuesdays what was going to happen on the Wednesday show when we were doing cash flow with James Martinez a couple of years ago. It already had happened, and that brings us into the neutrino, the faster-than-light particle. All these new developments at CERN, S-E-R-N, in Switzerland, is going to come up with is already being acted out and turned into a metaphor by Ion. And that's the huge tapestry we're weaving here. And you've got to be pretty sophisticated to be able to handle what we're doing. You have to have some background in some kind of knowledge tradition that you're pretty good at to feel what we're talking about, what we're expressing, and not get lost in it. You can also be a full-blown paranoid schizophrenic and having crazy anomalies in your situation. We can meet that too. So you can be if you're a sophisticated kook, we're the place for you to play, to improvise in. You can look at, metafigure ground. Ion is to the old non-physical as Bob is to culture. And so the interplay between Bob and Ion, and Carolyn's part of that, and JW, is the metaphoric, as you mean it. The interplay of Ion and Bob, as Ed has for his website for our archive. It is Ion and Bob, the Divine Comedy. That interplay is a metaphorical, Tom Waits said, I never saw the East Coast till I went to the West Coast. I never saw the West Coast till I went to the East Coast. One doesn't understand Ion unless they explore Bob knowledge, which was laid out for 25 years before Ion showed up. And one doesn't understand Bob unless one gets Ion. So you see the interplay, the tactile interplay there? They go together. And I certainly have the phrase second coming in my early chart I made with Bob Marshall, the bottom-up chart. I have as a technological ground the second coming.
Yeah, the Bob era is after the Coitus era. AC.
Yes. What Baudrillard called after the orgy, we call after the coitus. But it's interesting that I put, as trying to be a respectable communicator. I really blew it by putting second coming as a technical ground in there. And it turned out to be the most accurate statement I could ever make. I mean, I didn't know the implications of that. I was thinking of what the Evereeds channel through Michael Blake Reed were saying, that the second coming was a time of perpetual change. I had that in mind when I said second coming. That would be the metamorphosing, the intermutating of all the media, in the post-global theater during the global membrane. That was probably the imaging I had, but I did not know non-physical would show up as part of the mix. And that's the delight of good mind jazz, is that you will unfold things that will be a surprise.
The changes I see in myself, what Irving William Thompson was trying to define. He talked about a type of lucid thinking. He compared it to lucid dreaming, but it was not a dream, but it was a way of perception. Like you said, it becomes autonomic, in which you translate things in a more maybe coherent, artistic, poetic way. I approach people in general like in a more loving, respectful way. And
you mean culturally? You had the snobbishness of a high culture, high art attitude for many years. That's not in you anymore, is what you're saying.
It became like natural. It's a natural type of reaction. It's not like I'm trying to be nice or loving or whatever. It's just like autonomic.
Yes, and you're developing what McLuhan said about pop art. You're making it part of your consciousness and the environment is art form, and the people you meet is art form. They represent cultures. They represent patterns of history. They represent new, weird, quadraphenic extensions of the android meme, where everybody's forced to be an artist in the old sense, forced to make sense. So you find that you're not responding, like you say, emotionally. You're not trying to be more loving. You're not trying to be more hateful or cynical. You find everybody actually is turning into an object, but an object that you find interesting. You can find meaning and patterns in it. Yeah, no, that's well expressed, because I was always known as a good listener. And so I instinctively responded to everybody without snobbish categories imposed upon them. So I felt that instinctively, and then it developed into what I learned from the Holy Offices. But the common denominator of it is that anybody can, and Ian has said it's almost a fault, anybody starts talking to Bob will listen. You know, I can spend a lot of time with what apparently would be not worthy communication agencies, wasting my time with trivialities or people who are trivial. But I like the way you turn that into an art form. What I did instinctively, you're saying that's what you've adopted. You've moved out of your Illuminati bitch phase into a Finnegan, a full-grown Finnegan. Yeah, it's like, not that you find a big meaning, the huge literate Gutenberg meaning, but you find sub-meanings everywhere. And this French art critic came to a Monday night seminar once in the 70s, and by the end of the seminar, he was bemoaning that he finds everything meaningless. And McLuhan said, no, I find meaning everywhere. I think that's what you're talking about. You find meaning everywhere. It's subsets of meaning, not the big meaning or the final conclusion or the final noun or verb. You're small m. You're not finding capital M meaning. You're finding small m meaning everywhere in your pattern recognition.
Yes, and I see how, for example, poets like Pablo Neruda, he made poems about onions, about washing underwear, about everyday things, like poetry's everywhere.
It's an ecology. You're developing your perception of the ecology of artifacts and objects and of environments. You're having a modern ecological awareness, not an eco-fascist awareness, an ecological of media, of patterns. Yeah, that's what McComb calls from cliched archetype. The cliche, unnoticed environment becomes a means of archetypal apprehension. Big meaning or big pattern. Big data from cliched archetype. Now, the android replays this cliched archetype process, at hyper speed. And you can get, you can go in the slow lane and get big patterns, or you can go in the fast lane and be a culture consumer and go out like Andy Warhol to a party every night and consume rapidity of meaning in your environment.
But I also see that in Irving William Thompson. He says anthropologists go and study cultures, and they not only study the high culture, but folklore, songs, and all type of expressions of that culture. And I think that's what Ian does when he goes into pop culture and cartoons and jokes, and that's what I see, that, like you say, there you can get patterns from a bad movie, or like McLuhan said.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the thing, that you see that in the environment, this non-physical is communicating with you non-stop, and you just have to listen to this poetry that is anywhere, even in the most stupid pop song.
Yes. Now, so the vortices, what McClune calls the Copernican, the third Copernican revolution, 100 years ago, was instituted a lot by anthropology. Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, James Joyce, they all had their favorite anthropologists. So anthropology in general was a really important form of system that led into the idea that there's no division between high art and low art. McLuhan says that sociology, anthropology, and psychology was the last gasp of the Gutenberg Galaxy, the last books. So that the vortices, Wyndham Lewis, James Joyce, Eliot Pound, and maybe WBH a little bit, they recognized that new knowledge was coming forth in these new texts, Freud, psychology, sociology, and anthropology. So when people say that Ulysses is the last novel, Ulysses by James Joyce is the last novel, that doesn't mean it's the last book. The last book is somewhere in the genre of anthropology, sociology, and psychology. That kind of, which later those in favor of the Aboriginal cultures considered anthropology and imperialistic design. That's an expression of resentment to the Gutenberg dynamic, European domination of world cultures since Columbus. But in the Gutenberg galaxy, anthropology is the last gasp of the one-way song, to quote Wyndham Lewis, the one-way song of literacy. So, and then that's replayed in the Android meme phase by people, by the self-help books that took over. And those self-help books usually are a smattering of sociology, anthropology, art, and psychology, and some pre-literate shamanic knowledge. You can think of Norman O'Brown's book, Closing Time, 1973, which is about Finneg's Wake. But he was a scholar of many forms of knowledge, so that's all filtered through that book, Closing Time. So this is a really good idea that literacy continued with post-literate view of things, which was in sociology, psychology, and anthropology. They were looking at environments, still classifying them. And it's the breakthrough to studying media or forms of communication as art form that gets us finally out of the literate completion of anthropology, psychology, and sociology. And that's what Finneg's Wake is. It is the text that gives you the means to get beyond the insights, the archetypes of every form of literacy and every form of pre-literate awareness. So that is what I call the pentatic phase that leads to Orphic Baroque spirals in the Android meme, and then that becomes superseded by the hexatic, which is getting back to what Ion says is the original situation, which was an ascended state of eternal enjoyment of the I cell. That's the message of all the great religions and the private shamanic cults. That's the demon nuclei. If you look on the tiny note chart, you've got the Thompson quadrant represented by the Hadron, and that's a pun on the Hadron Corporation that was behind Reagan's kitchen cabinet in the 1980s. And the McLuhan quadrant has the meson or the mu meson, and then you have the Thompson has the baryon, another subatomic particle, baryon, and then for the Croker quadrant, you have the diquark, and that into which the tetrad that Croker represents, the tetradic form of government. And then you have, in my quadrant, the demon nuclei. And definitely Ion's emphasis on the cell, and that is what human beings are, the cell. And the perfect cell is fully developed with the ionosphere and 144,000 double helix strands of DNA. The nuclei, it's through the nuclei that one goes to other worlds. And certainly the way Ion presents us and the sense of humor and satire we include, we are perceived by many people as demons. So demon nuclei, even though that is not used anymore as a subatomic term, it was a term used in the 80s. It's in a book by John Brockman that he did that lays out these subatomic particles as categorized in the 80s. But demon nuclei certainly is so appropriate to what's going on in the world now and to how people perceive Ion. So I'm really happy I picked that word, even though it's not used anymore. But Ion says to the cardinals who listen to our show that just as you say, bring Jesus into your heart, what's the difference with demon possession there?
Yes, and I was thinking also about the angels. Like in the Bible, the angels do all the bad things human ask them to do, or
It's in the value systems you bring to the words, which is your culture. You bring your mythic stage, your values, the technology you use that you bring to the idea of angels.
yes, but for example, in many other cultures, the gods were like some types of energies that sometimes they were good, sometimes they were bad. But they're not like always good or always bad. It's just polarities of their expression.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the New Age phrase, you're responsible for your reality. Everything happens to you, create. The actual implementation of that wisdom is way more complex than people just thinking my psychology is a result of my attitude and my thinking. Ion has brought a new level of repentance, a very interesting, complex level, many-level, multi-bodied level of repentance, and it doesn't mean that you become a Charlie Manson, you know, killing people for some abstract cause. Though Ion does not look upon that as negative. Ion says that Hitler took his power, became quite ascended, but then got lost later in the role of authority versus power. So the word power is what Ion recommends. If you get into a role of authority, that's a problem. In most cultures built on authority, or what I call Rhyee, R-H-Y-E-E, which came from Dave Worster, the original principality, the original thing that made people seem less than and some god or human more than. Ion is post-Rhyee, does not offer itself as a principality, but would include whatever principalities developed around our situation as temporary stages of apprehension. So an understanding of Ion begins with recognizing what Madonna said, and Madonna is the figure in my quadrant. She said, I contradict myself, then I contradict myself. You will find contradiction all over the place when you are still in a limited, visually biased, duped position in relation to authority. So most gurus, most cultural institutions end up in an authoritative role, and that's what Ion would never represent, a form of authority, as opposed to making your own power. Yeah. So the idea, let me just say this, the idea that you are responsible for your own reality is one of the stupidest realities or ideas around, unless you understand how Ion complexifies it and redeems it.
Yes, I was thinking how what you are talking about is the new music, and Frank Zappa said he makes complex music for everybody. Everybody, but he says everybody can't like it.
That's right. Are you saying can, C-A-N, or C-A-N-N-O-T? C-A-N-T. Can like.
Can't.
Can't like it, yes.
Yes.
Well, that's...
He was making a joke, like, everybody can't like it.
Did he say that?
Yes.
They're all united. One size fits all was one of his album titles. Zappa was willing to be a sacrificial entity for that point. The McLuhan's variation was, you don't like those ideas? I got lots of others.
Make all this revision of all cultures, all times, not only going back, looking back, but also
future.
In the future.
Yeah, on one of the McLuhan and Maui sessions, somebody brings up something anthropologically, and Ion says, well, they don't know about, and he says, let's just make up a phrase, the spirit of green. They don't know about the spirit of green in the Dogon culture. Now take that, little tribe in Africa, the Dogon, and Ion comes up with an icon in their knowledge system, their wisdom system, and relates it to later matters. I mean, that's incredible excavation. You probably, I'm not sure, but you probably can't find any reference to that in any anthropology of the Dogon culture, unless you can't. But assuming you can't, then you have to say, I don't know if that's true or not. But Ion can excavate information that is not on the internet. That's what's incredible. With Ion, we go beyond the internet in terms of retrievals.
Yes, it's the ultimate Google.
Yes, Ion is the ultimate Google. And that's why I have to, by default, become the greatest doctor, scientist, artist, musician alive today. Because I invoked Ion, the greatest Android meme.
Yes, and I think we could talk then about, Irving William Thompson said, we need not a solution but a real revolution at all levels. And I think one aspect of the revolution is to stop the pirate economy. What's the name he calls?
The plunder
economy.
Plunder economy, yes.
And but there are many other aspects. But this revolution, this change, it won't take place as most people think. It's going to be political, but it takes place in yourselves. And
in your cells, cells.
Yeah.
And then it also takes place in your media, which could be extensions of your cells. It's not just your chemical body cell. It's your environmental cells. We all live in our little matrix cells now, in terms of our little wombs, virtual wombs. So cells can be multi-level in meaning. I'm trying to get people to recognize the revolutions that Iondom has already created. Have people, like Ion says, remember your ascended state, recall it. Well, all of the changes in the world of mortar or culture that we have brought over the last 6 years are what I'm hoping so-called youth would have an opportunity to hear about. That's the revolution. And of course, it's the revolutions and the transformations and mutations. I wouldn't just limit it to the word revolution. But I always like to start off as a cliche position in whatever we perform in the media, and then archetypalize it, and then remold the archetype into a cliche probe, a new cliche probe. So it's a systole, diastole, dialectic, squared, and because the Android meme is already doing it, and then Ion is doing it itself. What would be a phrase?
Know anything more about the circumcision of the heart?
No, I don't know more. I haven't talked to Ian about that. It could mean the change in the blood. We're just learning the role of the heart. We haven't finished that in relation to the hypothalamus. This is brand new knowledge that humans haven't heard before. And I suppose as we learn more about the role of the heart, it will be exemplified by the phrase circumcision of the heart. So, we ain't seen nothing yet. That's coming up. And I rest my case and stand validated, vindicated, and celebrated. Good night.
Okay.
Come to our concerts on Saturday night. You'll see that something profound is unfolding, and it requires a few, more than one attendance to begin to see the achievement of it. You know what I mean? You ain't seen nothing yet, even though it's already happened.